Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha TV. I'm Bilal, Zaidi, and you're watching The Big Picture. Our focus, of course, today is on growing relations between Pakistan and Russia and what does it really mean for India. And joining us for this discussion are our three panelists here, Ambassador Ronan Sen, former ambassador to Russia, as well as the US. And of course, we'll have to look at all those aspects in this entire debate. Professor Anuradha Chinoy is a professor on international relations at JNU. Thanks a lot for joining us, ma'am. We'll also be joined by another expert on relations largely in that region. But while moving ahead, I mean, let me just give you a sense of what this entire debate is about. We've already seen over the last few weeks or so that there have been a number of developments as far as Pakistan and their relations with Russia is concerned. President Putin was supposed to make a visit to Pakistan, but that could not really work out. The reasons, of course, are many. Speculations, too, are there as well. But at the same time, the fact that the foreign minister of Russia was able to make a visit to Islamabad is being seen as perhaps, in terms of at least posturing, Russia being able to really make up for that missed opportunity as it is being seen with President Putin's visit. At the same time, Pakistan's Army General Kayani was also able to make a visit to Moscow. So in terms of sending out the message, perhaps we can say that maybe at this stage, Pakistan trying to send out a message to the world that things are really working out as far as relations between Pakistan and Russia is concerned. How do you see that, sir?
Well, I think we should see this as, I don't, would tend not to overanalyze this because it's a bilateral, it should be seen in the bilateral context and also in the context of Afghanistan. For instance, President Putin, if he had visited Pakistan, that would have been in the context of the Quadrilateral Dialogue Summit.
Yes.
That's on Afghanistan, between Afghanistan,
yes,
Russia, Tajikistan, Pakistan. But he decided that it would not be worthwhile, his going there, and he might have his own reasons. I wouldn't like to speculate on that. But if that visit did take place, it would have been significant because it would be the first visit ever at that level.
Okay, so the fact that the visit didn't happen, is there much to read in that?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. But he decided that he won't go there. Then you had Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, visited, and General Kayani's visit also. I mean, there were no significant meetings at all.
Okay.
No
announcements either?
No announcements either, and that was not surprising because I was not expecting anything, honestly.
Okay.
He did not, there was of course no meeting with President Putin, there was no meeting with Prime Minister Medvedev, there was no meeting with Sergei Lavrov, that's foreign minister again, no meeting even with the defense minister, who was also out of town. And so the speculation there about, postponement of the Joint Commission, that was all, with India, that was, totally unnecessary.
Okay.
So he did have his meetings, and I'm told that there was not really much of discussions on military technical cooperation either.
All right. Professor Chinoy, if I could come to you, what is your sense in terms of looking at the larger picture of equations between, say, Pakistan and Russia, considering India has had long-term relationships, with Russia per se? You think there is a paradigm shift? Would you read it like that?
Not really. I think the gap on relations between Russia and Pakistan are very huge. Okay. And for decades, there is no history of good relations. In fact, the fact that Russia has always and continues to support India on crucial issues, whether it's Kashmir, the Security Council, India's vision in the international system, and the new relationships also within BRICS and the kind of defense support that Russia gives, it's too huge a gap for Pakistan to really make up with one visit. But it is a fact that Russia is looking at 2014. It's concerned with the new geopolitics of the region,
yes,
which are shifting very fast. Afghanistan is a continuous fear for Russia, the drugs, the trafficking,
okay,
the instability, the fact of Central Asian states, which are now the neighbors of Pakistan and close to that, the Pakistan-China relationship.
Yes.
Russia is somewhat uneasy, and also, Russia has a closer relationship with China today though there are contradictions, but I think China would put some pressure on Russia that they try and improve some of this relationship. But I think overall it actually does not go against India. It goes in favor of India because Russia and India have such close relationship. I think again India can leverage Russia to put pressure on Pakistan when Pakistan acts up as the military tends to do vis-a-vis India.
All right, fair enough. We'll take a look at how the equations really evolve as far as various alliances are concerned. Ashok Beharia, a senior fellow at IDSA, also joins us in this discussion. Mr. Beharia, what is your sense in terms of Afghanistan per se? What is your sense that how will, until 2014, how will this entire equation really evolve? To what extent is obviously Pakistan is an important player there, but to what extent is Pakistan important as far as other nations are concerned, including Russia?
If you're looking at Russia-Pakistan relationship, Afghanistan does play some role there, because both of them are equally concerned about possible US role beyond 2014.
Okay.
And Russia also has a concern. There is some convergence of interest there.
Okay.
But I wouldn't exaggerate it to say that it will affect India-Pakistan relationship too much.
Okay.
If you look at the Pakistani reaction to Putin's visit and things around that,
yes,
then I will see that there are two sets of reactions. One set of reaction coming from the English media that says that we should not be too enthusiastic about it.
Okay.
We should be realistic, because Russia can never give us what US has given, or US will give us in future. But in the Urdu media, they are in a celebratory mood.
Okay.
They are interpreting Kayani's visit, and before that the military chief's visit, then the Pakistani air chief's visit.
Okay.
In a different light. They are saying that defense cooperation with Russia will take us forward. Okay. And in the English media also, they are looking forward to diversifying the relationship, basically weapon systems. Okay. So that is how, they look at it. But all in all, they are not also looking at it as a leverage against India.
India is also emerging, obviously, as a key stakeholder in the entire Afghanistan debate. Now, to what extent can this equation really affect India, in negative or positive? But what are the stakes for India in Pakistan-Russia relations vis-a-vis Afghanistan?
I don't apprehend any trouble there. Like Russia is quite okay with India's presence out there. Pakistan has huge concerns about Indian presence. But you have a Russia, Pakistan, Tajikistan, that equation coming up. Russia also looks at cultivating Pakistan to contain its own Islamist insurgency at home. Okay. So there are a lot of things that play out here. It will be very difficult to say how things will pan out in future. But Russia has also its own concern in the region, and it thinks that by kind of bettering its relationship with Pakistan, it can moderate its relationship with other players in the region. That is why you found Russia coming out with a statement that we cannot afford to ignore Pakistan and Iran as far as Afghanistan's future is concerned.
Yes.
So Russia is looking at it as a realistic manner, but it does have its concerns about long-term American presence there. Okay. So has China. So you have an SEO angle there as well.
Okay.
So all this, I would say, basically they're balancing out each other's concerns out there.
All right, Professor Chinna, if I could just come back to you once again. We're trying to just take a sense of the stakes that Pakistan has in this entire picture. Traditionally, obviously, having long-term relations with the US, and now obviously off late drone attacks and kind of a dicey relationship between the two countries. You think this Russian angle can counter that to some extent?
Well, you see, there is a difference in the sense if the Pakistani public at large is very opposed to the drone attacks.
Yes.
And some of it gets reflected in populist statements by the
Khan taking a rally.
Yes, sure. By political leadership. But nonetheless, I think both the army, the ISI, and the real deep state of Pakistan, they know that no one can substitute their relationship they've had with the US. Even though they play both sides very often, it's not just that they're always taking the US position. They also work against the US in terms of pushing and in fact even supporting. One of the ministers said he supported encourage Al-Qaeda.
Okay, all right.
So they do play this, but the thing is that as far as Pakistan and Russia are concerned, Russia is very clear that Afghanistan and the region needs to have a regional solution.
All right.
And without that, there can be no stability in that region.
Okay.
So they do see the US as an outsider. And I think India's also been on record pushing also. India has a much more hybrid policy. But
Yes.
one of the arguments they also say is that a regional solution is also important, where you cannot neglect countries like India and others around. And it cannot be a unilateral or a bilateral resolution between the US and Pakistan and Afghanistan, for example.
All right, so we'll have to keep an eye on how all these equations actually evolve and the other aspects involved. We'll take a short break now. When we come back, we'll also go to Ambassador Ranjan Sen on what are the stakes for the US in this entire picture and how does that really play in. And of course, another look at how the markets also play out in terms of India's growing economic might. A short break now. Welcome back to The Big Picture. We're discussing India-Pakistan relations in the context of growing relations between Pakistan and Russia. Ambassador Ranjan Sen is here with us. What's the sense that you're getting in terms of how is the US going to really look at the entire picture? Obviously, there is a sense that maybe there's a bit of posturing involved as well, but does it really have any effect on the American foreign policy per se?
No, not at all.
Okay.
In fact, there has been also much closer cooperation
Yes.
than is evident. Like, for instance, when the difficulties with Pakistan arose,
Yes.
and primarily Pakistan's strength, and which no country can ignore, particularly in terms of this 2014,
Okay.
which is fast approaching, and people are positioning themselves. All countries, is Pakistan's contiguity with Afghanistan. And so when you had the problem of supplies, Russian stepped in.
Okay.
And also the Central Asian stepped in. And so there has been this cooperation. And they are not, as opposed to they found that the US presence there, including the military presence, was not against their interests. In fact, they wanted to be more in terms of work out a partnership, doing some deals there. They are very pragmatic about it. And they have consistently been so, and I've seen this evolve right through the Soviet period.
Okay.
I was involved very actively in
Yes.
the drafting of the Indo-Soviet Treaty, for instance, which was preceded by, in the post-Tashkent phase,
Yes.
the arms supplies to Pakistan by the Soviet Union, which
Okay.
continued from 68 to 71.
Okay.
Serious arms supplies.
Okay.
Then post-Tashkent, post-Simla, a bit of nostalgia
Okay.
for Tashkent. So this has evolved. I've seen this evolving when I was there in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, and finally for 6 years as ambassador.
So there were
in the
repeated
90s.
efforts being made.
There will be, because situation evolves. No country is static. You
Okay.
look at US-Pakistan relations, for instance, in just a short period of time.
Yes.
Situation is evolving. So, and they are very pragmatic, and they do not do posturing. If they have to go to Israel, they go to Israel, and Putin goes there. He doesn't look at whether any leader of the Kremlin has been there. So that doesn't affect their position on the Middle East issue or the Israeli-Palestinian issue. So they are pragmatic, and the United States also is aware of it, and so are we. We have a multiplicity of dialogues with the trilateral with Iran and Afghanistan,
Yes.
reasonably in Tehran, in the sidelines of
The NAM summit.
NAM summit. We've just had trilateral with the United States,
Yes.
which we found very, very useful, and that was envisaged much earlier. We should have, I think, a closer strategic engagement with Russia
Okay.
on Afghanistan,
Okay.
and also with China.
Okay.
With China, because China is not, outsourcing its Afghanistan policy entirely to Pakistan.
Yes. Yes.
They have their own interests, specific interests. And as you know, a number of Pakistanis, even during the height of the Kargil crisis, a number of Pakistanis were executed in Xinjiang.
Yes.
So it's a complex situation. People are maneuvering. People are, and in the United States, I can tell you, whatever you hear in the debates, there's a growing weariness about the involvement in Afghanistan.
Yes, of course.
So whatever the outcome of the presidential elections, you are not going to have a significant residual presence. There will be a residual presence, but the combat role will cease. The nature of the presence, the extent of the presence, how it's going to be phased out, that's a matter of, we'll have to see. But in terms of a combat role, that's out.
All right. All right. So, Professor Chenoy, how do you really see Pakistan, of course, Russian interests in Pakistan in terms of, Pakistan's own role in the region, be it as an important Muslim state, be it as a state that's perhaps also going to be at some point part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. How does that role really play out as far as Pakistan's position in the global situation is concerned?
I think Pakistan would like to assert it, continue to assert its position in Afghanistan and use it to, build itself up in the region and
beyond security.
Beyond security in West Asia, but they have economic constraints. They're not as important as an economic power as India is.
Yes.
Whereas India has actually given $2 billion almost of aid to Afghanistan. So India is picking up the pieces that have been left because of the conflict. And they're doing human security issues which are important for the Afghan people. So they're building a base of relationship there. So I think I would agree with Ambassador Sen that we have to engage closely with China independently without having always a vision of looking at Afghanistan through the lens of Pakistan, the fear of Pakistan also, but build independent relations just like they're attempting to do with Russia. We should attempt to look at building links with China. After all, we're competing with them also in Afghanistan, but we're also, I think, quite a significant player now in Afghanistan. There's a lot of goodwill for India because they have not taken up a military role. And and I think the US also would like India basically to pick up the pieces
and work on the development aspects and rebuilding aspects.
Whereas they continue to use the Pakistan military.
Fair enough.
So there is this difference, and I think India has to build on that really.
What is, Mr. Mehoria, what is your sense in terms of India's economic, role in this entire picture? Obviously, Russia looks at India as a very important player in terms of, as a market for defense equipment as well. According to figures, of course, the Russian market is about $13 billion US. 1/3 of that is supply to India. To what extent does that equation really also play out? Is this in a way Russia sending out a message to India that we are also exploring other markets?
No, there were calculations earlier that Russia is beefed with India's diversifying its weapon system.
Yes.
And but we had no other choice. And gradually, I think Russians have, as Ambassador stated, they're very pragmatic people, and they are reconciled to that. If they are looking towards Pakistan as a market, I don't think that is there in their minds. Like Putin has stated on 2-3 occasions that we are primarily seeking to engage Pakistan economically. You see Pakistan steel mills, they talk about Tarbela Dam, they talk about IP pipeline as well, Iran-Pakistan pipeline.
Yes.
They're also trying to build power plants. So all these economic engagements will be there. But I don't think they can, the Pakistan-Russia economic relation can ever pose a threat to Russia-India economic relations or can ever equalize that. But coming back to Afghanistan, if you are looking at the Afghanistan situation, the Russians, Chinese, they all know, despite their concerns about long-term American presence, whether in combat role or in a benevolent role, they know that their assistance to Afghanistan post-2014 to rebuild Afghanistan, will not be enough. To as far as rebuilding Afghanistan is concerned. If conservative estimates suggest that to keep Afghanistan army ANA equipped to take on the Taliban menace would require about to the tune of $2 billion a year, $4 billion a year. But Afghanistan's revenue at the moment is about $1.2, $1.3 billion. There's a huge gap. Until and unless the U.S. assisted by its Western powers, unless they come together, Russia, India, Iran, believe me, even China, if they come together, they can do nothing. So the need for assistance as far as Afghanistan's rebuilding and reconstruction is concerned is huge. And only international, systematic, sustained international effort will, stand Afghanistan in good state. So the Russians and the Chinese are well aware of that.
All right, so we'll take a short break now, and when we come back, we'll take a look at the future of the entire region and the various equations that are playing out. A short break now. Welcome back. You're watching The Big Picture. We're discussing the future of India-Pakistan relationship vis-a-vis the growing relationship between Pakistan and Russia. We're also trying to understand in this last segment what would really be the future of not just this region. We've discussed Afghanistan, but also in terms of the various equations in the evolving global order. Professor Chennai, if I could just start with you, just what is your sense in terms of how the next world order is coming? In fact, there have been a few comments online that suggest that maybe the Russian power growing again could also be something that could really challenge the American hegemony, so to say, over the region.
Well, the thing is that there is a very strong financial, economic crisis, a climate crisis, an ecological crisis, food insecurity, which continues. There's no way that this depression has even gone back, and that is really curbing the hegemonic positions, let's say, of the US. But nonetheless, militarily, they continue to be the biggest hegemonic power, and that will continue. But I think gradually they are realizing, and there is pressure from below, that this kind of interventionism they are doing on grounds and which is having a blowback. You could see in Libya, you can see in Iraq, that these countries and communities are falling apart. Identity politics has increased. And there is a lot of anti-Americanism on the street. And there is building a movement in the United States that perhaps the US should go a bit slow in these far-off areas where they're not really they're not doing this fix as they thought or they promised they would be able to do. So my sense is that geopolitics is not great for this region. Human security is. And collectively, the region and all the countries should try and rebuild these places. They're on a different page of history.
Sure.
And they have to have their own kind of politics.
All right. Mr. Bevaria, what is your sense in terms of looking forward? What happens to the global equations?
No, I think we are headed for a multipolar system. There's no doubt about it. But US will continue to play a preeminent role. There's no doubt about it.
Yes.
So we must try to leverage our equations with all the preeminent powers. All the upcoming powers, like China is a power, Russia is a power. We have our BRICS also, where we are trying to tie with Russia, Brazil, China, and others.
Sure.
So we would like to, we should aim at a multipolar global order, and we should have a multilateral diplomacy to complement that.
All right. Final words coming in from you, Ambassador Ranjan. What is it that India should take from this entire debate? The stakes for India, and how is it that India should really pursue this? There is also this view that India has to accept the fact that, obviously Russia would be looking at other options and Pakistan would also be trying to diversify their relations. Lessons for India?
Well, lessons from India. One is that, Pakistan will obviously try to diversify its relationship, but our concern is not only what is happening around Pakistan, but what's happening in Pakistan. Because, it's not just rhetoric when we talk about our interest in a stable and prosperous Pakistan.
Yes.
It is also in our interest. So we should look at, and hopefully at a situation where the relationship normalizes.
Okay.
Because, you know, Pakistan, let's be frank, I mean, Pakistan's room for maneuver is also reducing. But we shouldn't take satisfaction at that fact.
Okay.
We shouldn't rule, you know, one of the reasons why the Russians and the Soviets before them over the years have been, you know, like moving towards a little bit of arms supplies and other kind of things. It's not specifically to balance it.
Yes.
But they are aware that policies are not necessarily made in Islamabad.
Right.
Rawalpindi plays a role.
All right.
So they are conscious of that.
All
and
right.
if you look at Pakistan's history. So that is one aspect I just like to clear. But we should look at our own region, not just how to leverage the position to our advantage, but how to really make the neighborhood conducive to our national development.
All right. So
that should be our objective.
Absolutely. So on that note, of course, for India, a few lessons to be learned here, and of course, keeping an eye across the border as well as on all the geopolitics around the world, trying to make sure that whatever is the best in India's interest is something that India keeps an eye on. Thanks a lot. That's it that we have on this episode of The Big Picture. Keep watching Rajya Sabha TV.